The Colonial Parkway murders happened between 1986 and 1989 along the Colonial Parkway of the U.S. Commonwealth of Virginia or nearby. 3 couples were known to be murdered and 1 couple is presumed dead or missing. 8 people in total are considered to have been murdered by a serial killer who may have known the area relatively well with connections to the place through a business or an outsider who may have passed through the Colonial Parkway. There's been many theories over the years and it's been speculated there's more than one killer involved and even the possibility that not all the murders are connected to the same person. It's been speculated over the years that an individual who had connections to some of the victims in the Colonial Parkway murders through a security business called Liberty Security Services had possible knowledge or involvement in their murders. The individual's name was Ronald John Little. According to a public letter Ron Little released, he left his home country of New Zealand on February 20, 1985 to fulfill his life's dream of going to the United States. He boarded a jumbo jet and 21 hours later he touched down in the land of the free. Later on in the first page of his public letter he mentioned he lived in Tracy, California in his first year in America and married a woman in April 1985 who later he says left him. He then states he moved to Gloucester, Virginia in February 1986 and went to the Thomas Nelson Community College to get a state registration to become a security officer, and then later he claims to have become a private investigator. He states after 14 months of going up in the ranks working for Liberty Security Services, he then took ownership of the business and changed the name to Advanced Security and Investigation Services. On the second page of his public letter he talks about 25-year-old Brian Pettinger, a friend and former workmate of Ron's who went missing from a dance studio in Hampton, Virginia on December 4, 1987. Ron mentions that he got involved in searching for Brian because he was a friend and that Brian's body was eventually found on February 2, 1988 in the James River with his wrists and ankles bound by rope. He also mentioned 18-year-old Lori Ann Powell who worked for Ron Little's business Advanced Security as a secretary for 2 months between September and December 1987 went missing on the morning of March 9, 1987. Lori's body was later found a month later in the James River on April 2, 1988. Her body was found with multiple stab wounds in her back. Lori Ann Powell did not work or crossover with Brian Pettinger as he left Ron Little's Advanced Security in early 1987. Later on the same page of the letter he talked about 4 victims officially considered to be a part of the Colonial Parkway murders, describing how couple 14-year-old Robin Edwards and 20-year-old David Knobling were also found dead in the James River in Isle of Wight County in Virginia in September 1987. Robin Edwards' loose connection to Ron Little is through her mother Bonnie, who worked in the Liberty Security Office prior to Robin's death. He also wrote about how Colonial Parkway murders couple 20-year-old Richard Keith Call and 18-year-old Cassandra Sandy Haley disappeared on April 10, 1988, just 8 days after Lori Ann Powell's body was found in the James River on April 2, 1988. He mentioned the details in how Call's 1982 red Toyota Celica was found with his and Sandy's clothing inside it on the York River overlook on the Colonial Parkway and that the couple has never been found. Ron Little mentioned in the letter the local deputies, state police and the FBI asked him questions in regards to the murders which occurred in the Colonial Parkway. He alluded in the letter to being worried due to his connections to 2 of the victims, Lori Ann Powell and Brian Pettinger. He claimed his statements he made were turned upside down to erroneously point at him. He also mentioned in March 1988 the United Immigration and Naturalization Service and the FBI showed up at his work to question him. He said in the letter he was later arrested by the Immigration Service due to being in the United States of America illegally. Ronald John Little was 32 in 1987 and seemed to have a penchant for younger women. Ronald married Wendy Nicole Nutter in Virginia on March 2, 1987. Wendy was 18 years old at the time and 14 years his junior. It is considered by researchers of the case that 25-year-old Brian Pettinger, who had a working relationship at Ron's business and was a friend of Ron, and 18-year-old Lori Ann Powell, who for a short period worked for Advanced Security, are the strongest connections to Little.
Were there more Colonial Parkway murders? 10 on your side's Andy Fox has covered the murders since October 1986. 4 double murders, couples in cars at night. The first case was 35 years ago when Kathy Thomas and Rebecca Ann Dowsey were found murdered in Thomas's car. Tonight, Andy Fox asks, were there more Colonial Parkway murders than that?
Over a 6-month period of time, 4 people are thrown into the James River. 2 of them are considered part of the Colonial Parkway murders. But what about the other 2? The timeline and location, intriguing. Newport News resident Brian Pettinger and Gloucester County's Lori Ann Powell, her mother Joanne Compton.
It's funny, you know, you say the pain you had that day and how you feel today, but the truth is that pain never changed us. It's always the same pain.
As we reported, in 1988, Compton's daughter Lori Ann argued with her boyfriend, demanded he drop her off at this Gloucester County Little Sioux, never seen again.
33 years later, I still have no idea.
Brian Pettinger's former wife doesn't want to be identified. He disappeared December 4th, 1987, leaving this Hampton dance studio. 2 months later, Pettinger's body, seen here, found floating in the James River.
That's when it'll be pulled out of the drawer.
Consider us now pulling the case out of the drawer with this stunning timeline of bodies pulled from the James. In September 1987, David Nobbling and Robin Edwards, considered part of the Parkway murders, turn up dead in the James River, both shot in the back of the head. 3 months later, Pettinger disappears in February, found with wrists and ankles tied, rope around his neck, blunt force blows to the back of the head. He drowned. 2 months later, in April, Lori Ann's body found near Craney Island, stabbed 5 times in the back. Then, 1 week later, on April 10th, Keith Call and Cassandra Haley disappear from the Colonial Parkway, never to be seen again. In 7 months, 6 murders. Have you been disappointed that you have not been included in the discussion of the Colonial Parkway murders?
Yes.
Pettinger and Powell never considered part of the Colonial Parkway murders because those cases involved couples and staged cars. But Pettinger says, come on, look at the timeline.
I think the timing of all the murders certainly brings in the factor that they could be connected.
Not only timeline, but Pettinger and Powell worked together at Liberty Security Services in Gloucester County. And Robin Edwards' mother, Bonnie, told us she worked there too, but had left before the tragic loss of her daughter.
It's beyond coincidental that they all worked or had connections to Liberty.
The Liberty connection so striking, FBI interviewed Liberty owner Ron Little, who told us back in April 1988.
They asked me face to face, did I kill them? I said no. Did I have anything to do with their abductions and disappearances? And I said no.
The FBI concluded Little was not a suspect, then deported him to New Zealand on immigration charges.
You've got 7 legal pads of handwritten notes.
Suffolk police consider the Pettinger case open. However, new evidence hasn't been submitted since he was killed 33 years ago.
Sometimes things are just not just coincidence.
We asked Suffolk Police Lieutenant Gary Myrick, could Pettinger and Powell be connected to the Colonial Parkway murders based on this timeline?
Anything's possible. That's a small time frame when it comes to homicides in a specific area. So I'm not going to tell you that it's not connected.
Following our investigation, Lieutenant Myrick has agreed to review the Pettinger physical evidence for DNA testing in the lab.
When I die and I see Lori again, she'll tell me.
That's when you'll know.
That's when I'll know.
33 years of not knowing is enough time for the families. If you know anything about what happened in these cases, please call the crime line, 1-888-LOCK-YOU-UP.
It's also been speculated that maybe Brian Pettinger and Lori Ann Powell's murders are not connected to the Colonial Parkway murders, even though the timing, location and modus operandi perhaps suggests otherwise. Brian Pettinger did have a checkered past and may have had enemies from his time working as a security guard at Rose's department store. He used to hook up with underage girls and married women in the back rooms. It's been considered that maybe he could have been murdered by a jealous spouse or angry parent. It's also been mentioned by the first investigator in Brian's case that the only suspect considered to be involved in his murder was last with him at the dance studio in Hampton, Virginia on December 4, 1987. The suspect, Wayne Mack, failed a lie detector and also wrote a confession which seemed open to interpretation. Lori Ann Powell also had issues with her boyfriend at the time, and it's been mentioned she would regularly get into physical altercations with him. Her boyfriend was considered to be a person of interest in her murder. Former Gloucester County private investigator Ronald John Little had associates at Liberty Security Services who also seemed to have questionable characters. John Knight Hawthorne, a Gloucester County deputy and the previous owner of Liberty Security before Ron Little, was also considered as a person who may know more about the murders. Fred Atwell, also a former Gloucester County deputy sheriff and Colonial Parkway whistleblower, said the owner of Liberty Advanced Security offered him the Colonial Parkway murders crime scene photos. It's speculated that Fred Atwell also worked at Liberty Security in secret as a second job, and that John Hawthorne became a silent owner of Liberty or Advanced Security after Ron acquired the business. Steve Blackman, a former Gloucester County deputy and another silent owner of Liberty Security and an associate of Ron Little, was also looked at as a possible viable suspect and is considered a corrupt cop. He left his job as a Gloucester County deputy in 1989 and moved to South Carolina to pursue his career there. In South Carolina, he had numerous offenses in relation to the possession and distribution of cocaine. In December 1990, he was charged with shooting and killing 2 people at his father's property. He claimed they tried breaking into the home to commit burglary, but many speculate it was a drug deal gone wrong. He was convicted on manslaughter charges on July 18, 1991. Steve Blackman had a loose connection to Colonial Parkway murders victim Cassandra Sandy Haley because he dated her sister Terry for a period of time. It is not known if he has any connection outside of circumstantial evidence to the murders, and his modus operandi and his crimes involving drugs is different to the MO and crimes of the Colonial Parkway murders. Ronald John Little was eventually deported back to his native country of New Zealand in August 1989 before the murders of the 4th Colonial Parkway murders couple Daniel Lauer and Anna Maria Phelps. Ronald Little eventually changed his name to Chase Duvalier and lived a relatively normal life in New Zealand leading up to his death on December 25, 2021. His family have mentioned over the years he has referenced the murders in the Colonial Parkway in Virginia and believe he may have been involved in some of the murders he was questioned over. Ronald Little outed himself in his public letter, and many question marks are still left unanswered in regards to the murders in Virginia in the mid to late 80s.